The air within the diplomatic spires of the ocular hub was a calculated insult to anything with lungs meant for a real world. It was filtered to a clinical perfection, scrubbed of the musk of soil, the tang of ozone, and the heavy humidity that Cyrith of Clan Vora called life. Here, the atmospheric pressure was kept at a steady 40% of Zandrosian standard, making her feel as though she were a ghost drifting through a dreamscape of porcelain and glass. Every step she took was a performance of agonizing restraint. If she walked with her natural gait, the composite floor tiles would shatter under the density of her skeletal structure. If she jumped, she would likely pierce the vaulted ceiling before the sluggish gravity could remind her body where the ground was. She was a predator in a nursery, a silver-scaled nightmare dressed in the heavy silks of a diplomat. The ocular hub served as the heart of the curatorate, an assembly of species who prided themselves on being pure. To them, being pure meant evolving on worlds with light winds, low gravity, and no natural predators. They moved with the grace of drifting dandelion seeds, their voices a symphony of melodic whistles and harmonic hums. Cirith sat in the reinforced chair of her office, the only piece of furniture in the sector capable of supporting her 400-kilogram frame, and stared at the digital files of the candidates for her personal security detail. Prey, she thought, her inner eyelids flickering with a dry, rasping sound. All of them are prey. The first candidate, a Vrelian with translucent skin and 4 spindly arms, had nearly fainted the moment Cirith retracted her claws. The second, an armored Gethan, had spent the entire interview boasting about his exoskeleton's tensile strength, unaware that a single strike from a Karnax warrior could peel that shell like a piece of overripe fruit. They feared her, and that fear was a wall. It was a wall that kept her safe, yes, but it was also a prison of silence. The door to her office hissed open. The environmental sensors registered a minor shift in heat signature. A human entered. He was small even by the light standards of the hub. He stood perhaps 180 centimeters tall, with skin the color of weathered clay and dark hair cropped close to a square skull. He wore a simple, dark tactical suit that looked more like a technician's uniform than a soldier's armor. There were no visible weapons, no intimidating cybernetic graphs, no glowing power cells. He walked with a rhythmic, heavy-footed cadence that suggested he was ignoring the hub's low gravity rather than struggling with it. "My name is Elias Thorne," the man said. His voice was not a whistle or a hum. It was a low, resonant vibration that seemed to ground itself in the floorboards. "I am here for the security position." Cyrith leaned forward, the silver bands around her biceps catching the sterile light. Her golden eyes, slit-pupilled and hungry for something she couldn't name, scanned him. "According to the data slate, your species is new to the curatorate. Terra, a world of average gravity, average atmosphere. You are classified as a cooperative, omnivorous species. Why would a Karnax require a shadow that looks like it would break under a stiff breeze?" Elias didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He looked at her teeth, the serrated edges of her silver scales, and the massive muscles of her neck with the calm, detached interest of a geologist inspecting a stone. "I've looked at your incident reports, Ambassador," Elias replied. He shifted his weight, a movement so subtle and efficient it almost looked static. "You don't need someone to fight for you. You are a walking tank. You need someone who can see the threats you're too loud to notice. You need someone who can stay awake when your metabolism crashes, and someone who won't run when the political winds turn cold." Cirith felt a low rumble in her chest, a sound that made the water in the decorative fountain across the room ripple. "You speak with the arrogance of a predator, Elias Thorne, but you have no claws, no venom. Your hide is soft. If I were to strike you now, you would be a smear on the wall before your nervous system could register the pain." "Then don't strike me," Elias said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic coin, tossing it into the air. In the low gravity, the coin drifted upward in a slow, lazy arc. Cirith watched it, her instincts cataloging the trajectory. She could have caught it with a single finger, but Elias didn't reach for it. He waited. He waited until the coin reached the apex of its drift, and then, as it began its agonizingly slow descent, he stepped half a meter to the left. The coin landed perfectly in his open palm. "Efficiency," he murmured. The hub makes everyone move too fast because they're afraid of the void. I'm not afraid of the void, Ambassador. I'm just waiting for it to get tired of trying to kill me. Cirith stood up. The movement was a cascade of silver light and raw power. She walked toward him, her footsteps muffled by the thick rugs, until she was close enough to smell him. He smelled of salt, iron, and a faint, sharp scent that reminded her of the high-altitude storms of her home. It was the smell of something dense. She lunged. It wasn't a full strike, but a testing blow, her hand moving at a speed that would have decapitated Avrelian. Elias didn't move his head. He dropped. He didn't dive or roll. He simply collapsed his knees and let his body's internal weight pull him beneath her arm. He was back on his feet before she had fully retracted her strike, standing exactly where he had been, his heart rate steady at 60 beats per minute. "You didn't flinch," Cirith whispered, her voice a sibilant hiss. "I was counting the seconds," Elias replied. "Your reach is 2 meters. Your extension speed is 0.04 seconds. I had time for a coffee if I'd brought one." Cirith felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years of diplomatic service. She felt intrigued. "You're hired, Thorn. But know this, if you fail to keep up, I will not leave you behind. I will simply step over you." "Understood," Elias said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Just try not to break the floor on your way out. We've got a long day ahead of us." Chuang 2. The Kinetic Silence. The first 3 days of Elias Thorn's employment were marked by a silence that Cirith found increasingly aggravating. He did not boast. He did not ask about the legends of the Karnax. He simply existed in her periphery like a piece of well-maintained machinery. He spent hours studying the station's schematics, memorizing the ventilation shafts, and talking to the low-level maintenance droids in the service quarters. "He's a scavenger," Cirith told herself as she prowled the observation deck of the Hydrospires. "A clever, soft-skinned scavenger who has learned to mimic the calm of a killer." The Hydrospires were the pride of the ocular hub, a series of massive glass cylinders filled with bioluminescent algae and exotic marine life from a dozen light-years away. It was a place of peace, of shimmering blues and greens, where the delegates of the Curatorate came to meditate and conduct their most delicate negotiations. "Ambassador Cirith," a voice chirped. Cirith turned to see Praetor Zephan approaching. Zephan was an Aetheris, his body a shimmering cloud of pale violet gas contained within a translucent, crystalline suit. He floated a few inches off the ground, his movements effortless. "Praetor," Cirith replied, her voice carefully neutral. "I was unaware that the Aetheris required the humidity of the spires." "We do not," Zephan replied, the speakers in his suit translating his tonal vibrations into elegant speech. "But we value the aesthetics of life. I see you have acquired a new shadow, a human. How curious. I was under the impression that the Karnax preferred the company of those with more substance." Elias, standing 5 paces behind Cirith, said nothing. He was looking at the glass walls of the spire, his eyes tracking the movement of a school of silver fish. "The human is adequate for his duties," Cirith said, her claws itching. "Adequate?" Zephan echoed. "A dangerous word in these times, Ambassador. There are whispers that the Zandrosian mining colonies are expanding beyond their designated sectors. Some might call that a breach of the pure accords. My people require resources to survive the heavy tides," Cirith said, her golden eyes narrowing. "We do not apologize for our survival." "Survival is one thing," Zephan countered, his suit's light flickering into a sharp, icy blue. "Aggression is another. The Curatorate is a delicate ecosystem. We do not tolerate those who would introduce toxins into our air." Before Cirith could respond, Elias moved. It wasn't a violent movement, but it was sudden. He stepped between Cirith and the glass wall of the spire, his hand reaching for the small tactical tablet on his belt. "Thorn, what are you doing?" Cirith demanded. "Ambassador, move to the center of the walkway," Elias said. His voice was no longer conversational, it was a command. Zephan's suit hummed with indignation. "Human, you are interrupting a high level." "Now," Elias barked. Cirith's predatory instincts, honed by generations of war, chose to trust the urgency in his voice. She moved, her heavy boots thudding against the metal walkway. As she did, she heard a sound that didn't belong in the spires, a high-pitched, crystalline ring. The glass of the spire, 3 meters thick and designed to withstand the pressure of 1,000 tons of water, began to spiderweb. Static, Elias muttered, pulling a small electromagnetic pulse device from his pocket. The glass didn't just break, it shattered. But it didn't shatter outward, it imploded. A localized gravity spike, Zephon hissed, his suit's thrusters firing to keep him stable as the air pressure began to drop. Water, algae, and panicked marine life erupted into the walkway. The low gravity of the hub turned the flood into a chaotic, three-dimensional nightmare. Spheres of water the size of houses drifted through the air, carrying jagged shards of glass like shrapnel. Sirith braced herself, her claws extending to grip the railing, but the force of the water was immense. She felt herself being lifted, her weight no match for the kinetic energy of the surge. Elias was already moving. He didn't try to fight the water. He used it. He kicked off a floating piece of debris, his body cutting through the water with the streamlined efficiency of an apex predator. He reached Sirith just as a massive shard of glass, 2 meters long and sharp as a razor, drifted toward her head. He didn't deflect it. He grabbed her shoulder and yanked her down, using his own body as a counterweight. The glass whistled through the space where her neck had been a second before. They slammed into the opposite wall, the impact enough to crack the metal plating. Sirith felt the air leave her lungs, but Elias didn't even grunt. He was already looking for the next threat. "The emergency bulkheads!" Zephon screamed, his suit flickering erratically. "They aren't closing!" "The gravity spike is jamming the sensors," Elias shouted over the roar of the rushing water. "We need to reach the manual override." The override was 50 meters away, located at the end of a corridor that was now a swirling vortex of water and debris. To a pure species, it was a death sentence. To Sirith, it was a challenge that required strength she couldn't exert in this thinning atmosphere. Elias looked at her, his eyes dark and focused. "Can you hold the line?" "What?" Sirith gasped, coughing up water. "I need an anchor," Elias said. He pulled a length of high-tensile cable from his belt and clipped it to her ceremonial silver bicep band. "I'm going for the override. Don't let me drift." He didn't wait for her permission. He plunged into the vortex. Sirith watched in disbelief as the human moved. He didn't swim like a fish. He moved like a persistence hunter on the plains of ancient Earth. He didn't fight the current. He waited for the right moment to push, for the exact second of calm to gain an inch of ground. He was a creature of rhythmic, unending effort. The water was freezing, filled with the toxins of the algae, but Elias didn't slow down. His heart rate, which Sirith could monitor through the cable's feedback, began to climb. 70, 80, 100, 150. He reached the override panel, his fingers moving with surgical precision despite the shards of glass cutting into his skin. He didn't flinch as a silver fish slammed into his ribs. He didn't stop as the oxygen levels in the corridor dropped to lethal levels. He was a human, a creature of soft skin and no claws. But in that moment, as the cable strained against Sirith's arm, she realized what he was. He wasn't a scavenger. He was a survivor. With a final violent pull, Elias engaged the manual lever. The bulkhead slammed shut, cutting off the flood with the finality of a guillotine. The water began to drain into the emergency reservoirs, and silence returned to the spires. Elias slumped against the wall, his chest heaving, his suit shredded and soaked in blood. He looked up at Sirith, who was still gripped by the shock of the encounter. "Nice catch, Ambassador," he panted, wiping blood from his forehead. "But I think you owe me a new suit. This one was a favorite." Sirith walked over to him, her silver scales gleaming in the dimming light. She looked at the blood, then at the manual override, and then at the man who should have been dead. "You should have drowned," she said, her voice a low rumble. "Your lungs should have collapsed. Your heart should have stopped." "I'm human," Elias replied, his breathing finally beginning to steady. "We don't stop just because it's hard. That's the whole point of us." Zephon floated toward them, his suit's light a flickering, suspicious orange. This was a tragic accident, a failure of the station's structural integrity. Elias stood up, his legs shaking, but his gaze unwavering. "It wasn't an accident, Prater. The gravity spike was targeted. I saw the emitter signature on my tablet before the glass blew. Targeted? Sefin hissed. By whom? By someone who wanted the Karnak's ambassador to look like she couldn't handle the pressure, Elias said, stepping closer to the praetor. Or by someone who wanted her dead and decided a structural failure was the cleanest way to do it. Cyrith looked at the human, then at the praetor. The wall of silence between her and the world hadn't vanished, but for the first time someone was standing on her side of it. We're going back to the sector, Elias, Cirrus said, her voice carrying the harmonic of a hunter. Copy that, Elias replied, falling into step 1 pace behind her. But let's take the stairs. I've had enough of gravity for one day. As they walked away, Cirith realized she was no longer analyzing Elias's scent for weakness. She was analyzing it for the smell of the storm. And for the first time in years, the ocular hub didn't feel quite so empty. Blood and silver. The sky over Zandros was never blue. It was a bruised violet, heavy with the weight of 1,000 storms, and a gravity that felt like the hand of a god pressing down on the shoulders of the world. On Zandros, to stand was an achievement. To run was a declaration of war against physics. Cirith remembered the hunt of the Silver Sun, a rite of passage for the youth of Clan Vora. She had been 19 years old, her scales still soft and translucent, like unpolished glass. She had carried a heavy lance made of obsidian and bone, tracking a rift beast through the iron canyons. The beast was 3 times her size, a mass of muscle and malice that moved with the speed of a falling mountain. She had tracked it for 4 days, her muscles screaming, her breath coming in ragged gulps of pressurized air. When she finally brought it down, her lance buried deep in its primary heart, she hadn't felt joy. She had felt a profound, crushing solitude. She was the best of her kind, and that meant there was no one left to walk beside her. In the ocular hub, 3 light years away from that violet sky, Cyrith watched the man who walked beside her. Elias Thorne was sitting on a reinforced crate in the maintenance sub-level of the Zandrosian embassy. The room was dim, lit only by the flickering amber glow of a diagnostic monitor. He had stripped off the shredded remains of his tactical suit, revealing a torso that was a map of old tragedies. There were jagged white lines across his ribs, circular puckers from thermal rounds, and a long, faint indentation that ran from his collarbone to his hip. He was currently pressing a medical sealer to the fresh gash in his side, the one earned from the collapsing glass of the hydrospires. You are leaking quite a lot of fluid, Elias, Cirith said, her voice echoing in the metallic chamber. In the low gravity of the station, her words sounded hollow to her own ears. It is just blood, Ambassador, Elias replied, his voice flat and focused. My clotting factors are boosted. I will be functional in 10 minutes. I have seen worse on a bad Tuesday back in Sector 7. Cyrith moved closer, her silver scales catching the amber light. She moved with a grace that was terrifying in its economy, a predator who had learned to navigate a porcelain world. Why do you not seek a medical droid? The Curatorate provides top-tier care for its staff. Because a medical droid would report my physiology to the central database, Elias said. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting her golden ones. And we are trying to keep a low profile, remember. If the pure species find out I have a resting heart rate of 40 and a bone density that rivals a Gethin, they will stop thinking of me as a soft shell and start thinking of me as a threat. I prefer being the guy who gets ignored. You were not ignored in the spires, Cirith noted. You were an anchor. Elias shrugged, a movement that clearly caused him pain, though he didn't let a single grunt escape his lips. That was just physics. You were the one who held the cable. If you had let go, I would have been a stain on the bulkhead. I would never have let go, she hissed, her claws extending a fraction of an inch. A Karnax does not abandon those who stand in the line of fire. It is a matter of clan honor. Elias leaned back against the cold metal wall, a tired sigh escaping him. Honor is a luxury, Cirith. Down in the mud, it is just about who is still breathing when the dust settles. Your people call it a duel. My people call it an FUBAR situation. We just try to make it less of a mess. He went back to his work, his fingers steady as he applied a second layer of sealer. Cirith watched him, her mind turning over the information he had provided. She had spent cycles studying the various species of the Curatorate, She knew the Vrelians were master mathematicians because their thin bodies required them to calculate every movement to avoid injury. She knew the Aetherists were poets because their gaseous forms were as fleeting as a summer breeze. But the humans were a blank space. They had arrived on the galactic stage 30 years ago, smiling, bearing gifts of art and music, and asking for nothing but a seat at the table. They were the ultimate diplomats. They were so cooperative, it was almost suspicious. "Your world, Earth," Sirith began, her tail twitching with a restless energy. "The data says it is a paradise. Blue oceans, green forests, gentle weather." Elias let out a short, dry laugh. "The travel brochures are great, yeah. But Earth is also a place that tried to kill us for 2 million years before we figured out how to hit back. We grew up chasing things until they died of heat stroke. We survived ice ages by huddling in caves and refusing to give up. We are built for the long haul, Ambassador. We are the things that don't stop coming." "Is that what you are? A thing that does not stop?" "I am a soldier," Elias said, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Or I was. Now I am just a guy trying to make sure a silver-scaled lady doesn't get assassinated by a cloud in a suit." He stood up, his movements slow but precise. He pulled a fresh shirt from a locker, the dark fabric hiding the bandages. On his belt, he checked the small diagnostic tablet. He had recovered a fragment of the gravity emitter from the spire wreckage, a tiny sliver of black glass that looked like a tooth. "I ran the serial numbers on the debris," Elias said, his tone shifting back to professional. The emitter wasn't a standard station component. It was custom built. High frequency, localized pulse. Whoever set it knew exactly where the structural weaknesses of the hydrospires were. They didn't just want a mess. They wanted a catastrophic failure. "Zephon," Sirith murmured. "Maybe, but Zephon is a politician. This feels like work done by a pro, someone who understands kinetic energy and structural stress. I went down to the docks while you were meeting with the Council of Three. There was a ship that left the hub 2 minutes after the breach, a freighter registered to a shell company in the Rimward territories." "The Rimward territories are lawless," Sarah said, her golden eyes flashing. "A haven for mercenaries and those who wish to disappear." "Exactly. It is the perfect place to hire a trigger man who doesn't mind a bit of collateral damage." Elias walked over to the monitor and pulled up a star chart. "If we want to find out who really pulled the pin on that grenade, we need to look at the money. Zephin might be the mouth, but someone else is providing the muscle." Sirith felt a surge of cold fury. "They treat me like a monster, yet they use the shadows to do their killing. They call themselves pure while they hide behind mercenaries and gravity spikes." "That is the game, Ambassador," Elias said. He adjusted his belt, his hand lingering near his hip where a hidden holster sat. "They see you as a predator because you look like one. They see me as a soft shell because I look like one. We use that. We let them think they know exactly what we are capable of." He looked at her, and for the first time, Sirith saw a flicker of something in his eyes that wasn't pragmatism. It was a shared understanding, a recognition of the weight they both carried. "I was lonely on Zandros because I was too strong," Sirith whispered, almost to herself. Ilias nodded slowly. "I was lonely on Earth because I couldn't forget how to fight even when the war was over. I guess we are both just ghosts in the machine." The door to the sub-level hissed open, and a small hover drone entered, its lights flashing a frantic red. "Ambassador Sirith," it chirped in its synthetic, high-pitched voice. "Urgent summons. The Council of Three has convened an emergency session. Praetor Zephin has filed a formal grievance against the Karnax Imperium." Sirith straightened her back, her silver scales shifting with a metallic rasp. "The time for hiding in the shadows is over, it seems." Elias checked his comms unit and gave a sharp nod. "Roger that. I will be right outside the chamber doors. Just remember, Sirith, don't let them bait you. They want a beast. Give them a diplomat." "And what will you be doing, Elias?" Elias checked the charge on his EMP device and offered a grim smile. "I will be doing the grunt work. I am going to see if I can find that freighter before it hits the jump point. If we can get a name, we can get a confession." Sirith reached out, her clawed hand hovering near his shoulder. She didn't touch him. afraid that even a gentle gesture from a Karnax would bruise his soft human skin. Be careful, Thorn. The hub is full of traps. I am a persistence hunter, Elias said as he turned toward the exit. Traps are just obstacles I haven't walked around yet. I will see you at the finish line. He vanished into the darkened corridor, moving with a kinetic silence that left no footprints. Sirith stood alone for a moment, the amber light of the monitor reflecting in her golden eyes. She felt the crushing gravity of the political storm ahead, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like the only soul capable of bearing the weight. The council chamber of the ocular hub was a masterpiece of architectural arrogance. It was a vast hemispherical room where the floor was made of polished obsidian and the walls were composed of a living, bioluminescent coral that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. The seating was arranged in a steep amphitheater, ensuring that those on the floor were always looked down upon by the species of the higher gravity tiers. Sirith stood in the center of the floor, her silver formal robes draping over her powerful frame like liquid moonlight. Above her, seated in the prime tier, were the Council of Three. There was High Arbitrator Vora of the Vrelians, an ancient being whose skin was as thin as parchment, Counselor Thrum of the Gethans, encased in a gilded environmental suit, and Praetor Zephon, whose violet gas form was currently roiling with a visible, agitated intensity. Ambassador Sirith, High Arbitrator Vora began, his voice a dry whisper amplified by the station's sonic arrays. We have gathered to discuss the incident at the Hydro Spires. Praetor Zephon has presented evidence that the structural failure was caused by a resonance frequency originating from the Karnax diplomatic sector. A lie, Sirith said, her voice steady and resonant. She didn't shout. She didn't snarl. She stood like a pillar of salt, unmoving. The failure was caused by a localized gravity pulse. My security officer recovered a fragment of the device from the wreckage. It was not of Karnax manufacture. A fragment? Zephon's voice hissed through the speakers, dripping with theatrical skepticism. How convenient. A piece of debris recovered by a human mercenary, a species known for their deceptive nature and their willingness to sell their loyalty to the highest bidder. My officer is not a mercenary, Sirith countered. He is a member of my staff, and his loyalty is not in question. Is it not? Zephon floated forward, his violet form pressing against the glass of his suit. Humans are a cooperative species, Ambassador. They are soft, they are weak. Why would a Karnax, a scion of the apex predators of Xandros, choose such a fragile creature for protection? Unless, of course, the human was chosen for his ability to handle the delicate, illegal machinery required to sabotage the station without leaving a Karnax footprint. The murmurs in the chamber grew louder, a sea of whistles and hums that felt like a swarm of insects. Sirith could feel the heat rising beneath her scales. She wanted to reach out and crush the pedestal in front of her. She wanted to show them exactly why her people were feared across the sector. But she remembered Elias's words. Don't let them bait you. Give them a diplomat. The human officer Thorn is currently conducting a forensic sweep of the station's perimeter, Sirith said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. He has already identified a vessel of interest that departed the hub moments after the explosion. If the Council is truly interested in the truth, I suggest you authorize a pursuit of the freighter Cloudrunner. The Cloudrunner is a legitimate merchant vessel, Zephon snapped. Its departure was scheduled weeks in advance. Your attempts to deflect blame onto innocent traders are as clumsy as your footsteps, Ambassador. Arbitrator Vora raised a thin, trembling hand. Enough. The evidence presented by the Praetor is circumstantial, but so is yours, Ambassador. However, the safety of the hub is paramount. Until a full investigation can be completed by the Curator's own security forces, the Karnax sector will be placed under a Level 2 lockdown. No personnel are to leave or enter without express permission from this council. Lockdown? Sirith's claws bit into the obsidian floor. You are isolating an entire diplomatic mission based on the word of a man who has everything to gain from our exclusion? We are ensuring the peace, Counselor Thrum said from within his golden suit. If you are innocent, the truth will surface. If not, well, the pure species have little patience for predators who bring their wars into our sanctuary. The session was dismissed. The lights in the chamber dimmed, leaving Cyrith standing alone in the center of the obsidian floor. She looked up at the empty tiers, feeling the familiar weight of the world's judgment. She was a monster to them, a beast to be caged. They didn't see the diplomat who had spent years learning their songs. They didn't see the woman who mourned for her world. They saw only the silver and the gold, and the potential for violence. She turned and walked out of the chamber, her steps heavy and deliberate. Outside in the grand foyer, the other delegates moved away from her, creating a wide, empty circle around her. She was a leper in a city of saints. "Thorn," she whispered into her comms unit. "Elias, do you copy?" There was a long moment of static. Then a voice crackled through the earpiece. It was faint, distorted by the station's internal shielding. "Ambassador, I am a bit busy, currently playing tag with some unfriendly types in Deck 18. Elias's voice was strained. He sounded out of breath, a rare occurrence for him. "Elias, what is happening? The Council has ordered a lockdown. You must return to the sector immediately." "Can't do that, ma'am." Elias grunted, and Cyrith heard the distinct sound of a thermal discharge. "I found the freighter. Or rather, I found the guys who own the freighter. They are currently trying to convince me to stop breathing. I am heading for the primary ventilation hub. If I can get to the atmospheric scrubbers, I can bypass the lockdown seals." "You are injured, Elias. You cannot fight 8 mercenaries alone." "I am not fighting them, Cyrith," Elias said, and there was a strange, grim mirth in his tone. "I am just making them run, and humans are very, very good at running. Just stay put. I am going to bring you a present." The comms cut out. Cyrith stood in the foyer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the polished walls at her own reflection. She saw the predator. She saw the silver ghost. And then she made a choice. She didn't head back to the Zandrosian sector. She didn't obey the lockdown. She turned toward the maintenance shafts that led to Deck 18. If the galaxy wanted a beast, she would give them one. But she would be a beast with a purpose. She would be the shield for the man who had dared to walk in her shadow. The Praetor's Gambit. Deck 18 was the graveyard of the ocular hub. It was a labyrinth of rusted conduits, groaning pressure valves, and ancient atmospheric processors that had been bypassed decades ago. The gravity here was erratic, fluctuating between 10% and 80% as the station's primary stabilizers struggled to compensate for the lack of maintenance. The air was thick with the smell of stagnant water and recycled oil. It was a place where things went to be forgotten, which made it the perfect hunting ground. Elias Thorn was running. He wasn't sprinting. A sprint was a waste of energy, a desperate burst of speed that left the body depleted and the lungs burning. Elias moved with a rhythmic, pounding trot that he could maintain for hours. His heart was a steady drum, his breathing a mechanical cycle of 4 counts in and 4 counts out. Behind him, he could hear the heavy, frantic footsteps of his pursuers. There were 4 of them. Mercenaries. Probably former security contractors from the Rim, judging by the way they shouted orders and wasted their ammunition. They were wearing medium combat plating, which was a mistake on Deck 18. The armor was heavy, and in the fluctuating gravity, it was a liability. Every time the gravity spiked, they stumbled. Every time it dipped, they drifted. Elias, on the other hand, was a ghost of kinetic efficiency. He knew exactly when to push off a wall, when to slide beneath a low-hanging pipe, and when to let the low gravity carry him across a gap. He had been running for 20 minutes, leading them deeper into the maze. "Hey, soft shell!" one of the mercenaries shouted, his voice echoing through the rusted corridor. "Stop running and we will make it quick. You are just a human. You can't keep this up forever." Elias didn't answer. He didn't even look back. He just kept moving. He knew their biology better than they knew his. They were Gethans and Vrelian hybrids, species built for short bursts of aggression. They were currently flooding their systems with adrenaline, their muscles burning through glucose at an unsustainable rate. In 5 minutes, their lactic acid levels would spike. In 10 minutes, their vision would blur. In 15, their hearts would begin to falter. Elias, however, was a product of the Endurance 6 program. His mitochondria were more efficient. His cooling system was superior. His mind was a calm, cold lake. He could run them across a continent if he had to. He was the persistence hunter, and they were the prey that didn't know they were already dead. He reached a junction where the gravity dropped to nearly zero. He kicked off the ceiling, spinning his body in midair to face his pursuers. He pulled a small curved knife from his boot, the blade made of a non-reflective ceramic. "First mistake," Elias whispered. "You assumed I was running away." The first mercenary rounded the corner, his thermal rifle raised. He was gasping for air, his face pale beneath his visor. Before he could find his target, Elias was on him. He didn't use a flashy combat move. He used physics. He grabbed the mercenary's rifle barrel and yanked it downward, using the man's own momentum to pull him forward. At the same time, Elias drove his knee into the mercenary's solar plexus. The man went down with a wet, choking sound. Elias didn't stay to finish him. He was already moving toward the second mercenary, who was trying to adjust his footing in the zero gravity. Elias used an overhead pipe to swing himself in a wide arc, his heavy boots connecting with the side of the second man's helmet. There was a sickening crack, and the mercenary spun away into the darkness, unconscious before he hit the ground. Two left. They had stopped running. They were standing back to back in the center of the junction, their rifles sweeping the shadows. They were terrified. They had been told they were hunting a human, a soft species that valued cooperation and art. They hadn't been told they were hunting a ghost from the Endurance 6 program. "Show yourself," the third mercenary screamed, his voice cracking. "Come out and fight like a man." Elias was perched on a cable bundle 12 meters above them. He watched them for a moment, his breathing still perfectly controlled. He could hear their heartbeats, frantic and erratic in the silence of the deck. He could smell their fear, a sharp metallic tang in the stagnant air. "You don't want to fight a man," Elias said, his voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You want to fight a shadow, but the thing about shadows is that they are always right behind you." He dropped. He hit the third mercenary like a falling star, his weight amplified by a sudden spike in the local gravity field. The man's armor shattered under the impact. Elias rolled, his knife flashing in the dim light as he sliced through the fourth mercenary's primary hamstring. The last man fell to the deck, clutching his leg and screaming. Elias stood over him, his face a mask of cold, professional detachment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even tired. He was just finished with his task. "Who hired you?" Elias asked, the ceramic knife resting against the mercenary's throat. "Go to hell," the man hissed, though his eyes were wide with terror. Elias applied a fraction of pressure. "You are losing blood, friend. About 200 milliliters a minute. In 5 minutes, your blood pressure will drop. In 10, you will go into hypovolemic shock. If you tell me what I want to know, I will apply a sealer and call a med droid. If not, I will just wait. I am very good at waiting." The mercenary looked at the cold, dark eyes of the human. He saw no mercy there. He saw only the infinite patience of a predator who had all the time in the universe. "Zephon!" the man gasped. It was Zephon. "He gave us the codes for the Spire. He wanted the Karnax gone. He said the human wouldn't be a problem." Elias nodded. "Yeah, people say that a lot. It is a common misconception." He applied the sealer to the man's leg and tapped a command into his tablet, alerting the station's security droids to the location of the wounded mercenaries. He didn't stay to watch them be taken into custody. He had what he needed. He turned to head back toward the upper decks, but he stopped when he saw a shape silhouetted in the doorway of the junction. It was tall, silver, and carried the weight of a world. Sirith. "I told you to stay in the sector," Elias said, his voice softening. "I told you I would not leave you behind," Sirith replied. She walked into the amber light, her golden eyes scanning the carnage of the junction. "You did this? Alone?" "They were poorly trained," Elias said, sheathing his knife, "and they didn't understand the terrain. I just took them for a walk." Sirith looked at the mercenaries, then back at Elias. She saw the blood on his shirt, the bruises on his face, and the calm, steady rhythm of his breathing. She felt a sudden, sharp pang of realization. She had spent her life thinking that strength was about the size of one's claws or the density of one's bones. She had thought that to be an apex predator was to be the loudest, most violent force in the room. But here was a man who was barely 80 kilograms of flesh and bone, and he had dismantled 4 armored warriors with nothing but his mind and his endurance. "You are not what you seem, Elias Thorne," she said, her voice a low rumble of respect. None of us are, Cyrith. That is the lesson the curatorate is about to learn the hard way. They moved together toward the elevators, leaving the shadows of Deck 18 behind. The station was still in lockdown, but Elias knew the back doors. He knew how to move through the veins of the hub without triggering a single alarm. As they rode the lift toward the diplomatic spires, Cyrith stood close to him. She didn't fear breaking him anymore. She realized that he was, in many ways, more durable than she was. Her strength was explosive, a sudden burst of power that could shatter mountains. His strength was geological, a slow, unstoppable force that could outlast the stars. What happens now? Cyrith asked. Zephan has the council in his pocket. He has the evidence. He thinks he has the evidence, Elias corrected. But he doesn't know I recorded the confession, and he doesn't know that I've already sent a copy to the Zandrosian High Command. You what? Cyrith's ears flicked forward in surprise. My loyalty is to you, Ambassador, but my job is to protect the interests of the mission. If the Council won't listen to a Karnak's diplomat, they will certainly listen to a Karnak's battle fleet sitting on their doorstep. Cyrith felt a cold chill run down her spine. You are provoking a war? No, I'm preventing one, Elias said. Zephan wants a quiet assassination. He wants a clean political takeover. He doesn't want a war. The moment he realizes that his secret is out and that your people are ready to burn this station to the ground to get you back, he will fold. Predators like Zephan only hunt when they think the prey can't bite back. He looked at her, and his expression was grim. But we have to move fast. He is going to try one last play. A public trial, a harmonic purge. He is going to try to turn the entire hub against you before the fleet arrives. Let him try, Cyrith said, her claws clicking against the elevator floor. I have spent my life being judged by those who fear me. I am no longer afraid of their songs. The elevator reached the Tier 1 levels, the doors opening to a hallway filled with armed security droids. They were painted in the soft pastels of the curatorate, but their weapons were very real. Ambassador Cyrith, the lead droid intoned, you are under arrest for crimes against the Pure Accords. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Elias stepped forward, his hands empty and visible. She isn't resisting. We are here to see the Council, and you might want to tell Praetor Zephan that his freighter just got intercepted by a Terran patrol vessel. The droid paused, its processors whirling. That information is not in our database. It will be in about 5 minutes, Elias said, his voice cool and confident. In the meantime, why don't you show us the way? We wouldn't want to keep the Council waiting for the main event. Cyrith looked at Elias, a surge of pride warming her scales. She saw the way he stood, unyielding and unafraid, a small man in a vast, hostile galaxy. He was the persistence hunter, and he was walking straight into the mouth of the beast, and she was honored to walk beside him. The high plaza of the Ocular Hub was packed. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of species had gathered to witness the fall of the Karnak's ambassador. The air was thick with the scent of fear and anticipation. In the center of the plaza, a massive platform had been erected, surrounded by a ring of harmonic emitters. This was the site of the purge, a ritual where a defendant was subjected to the collective tonal judgment of the pure species. For a Karnax, with their sensitive hearing and their heavy physiology, the sound would be agonizing. It was a death of 1,000 screams. Praetor Zephan stood at the head of the platform, his violet form glowing with a triumphant, radiant light. He looked down at Cyrith and Elias as they were led onto the stage, their hands bound in hard light restraints. People of the hub. Zephan's voice echoed through the plaza, a beautiful harmonic melody that hid a lethal intent. Today we purge the darkness from our midst. Today we say no to the predators who would bring violence to our sanctuary. The crowd erupted in a chorus of whistles and hums, a wave of sound that made Cyrith's head throb. She looked at the faces of the delegates. She saw the Vrelians, their eyes wide with a fearful joy. She saw the Gethans, their suits shining in the light. She saw the prejudice that had defined her life, the wall of judgment that had kept her isolated for so long. She looked at Elias. He was standing perfectly still, his eyes closed. He looked like he was meditating or waiting. Ambassador Cyrith, Zephon said, turning his attention to her. You have been found guilty by circumstantial weight. Do you have any final words before the song begins? Cyrith looked up at the violet sky of the hub's artificial dome. She thought of the iron canyons of Xandros. She thought of the loneliness of the apex. I have spent my life trying to prove that I am more than my claws, Cyrith said, her voice low and steady. I have tried to sing your songs. I have tried to follow your rules. But I realize now that you don't want a diplomat. You want a scapegoat. You want someone to fear so that you can feel pure. Pure? Zephon laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Purity is power, Ambassador, and you have none. He raised his hand to signal the start of the song. Wait, Elias said. The plaza went silent. Zephon turned his gaze toward the human. You have no standing here, mercenary. I'm not a mercenary, Elias said, opening his eyes. I'm a witness, and I have a question for the council. If the Karnaks are the monsters, why is it that the only species in this room currently holding a weapon of mass destruction is the Aetheris? Zephon's form flickered. What nonsense is this? Elias tapped his foot against the platform. Beneath this stage is a second gravity pulse emitter, much larger than the one in the spires. It is set to trigger at the climax of the song. It won't just kill the ambassador, it will collapse the entire high plaza, killing every delegate in this room. And then, I imagine, Praetor Zephon will claim it was a Karnak suicide bomb, a final act of aggression that justifies a full-scale invasion of Xandrosian space. The crowd went cold. The hums and whistles died away, replaced by a terrified silence. You lie, Zephon screamed, his violet gas roiling in a frenzy. Check the power draw on the subfloor grid, Elias said, looking directly at High Arbitrator Vora. Check the encrypted frequency Zephon is currently broadcasting from his suit. He isn't waiting for the song. He's waiting for the timer. Vora's thin fingers flew across his data tablet. His face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. The power draw, it is off the charts. Praetor, what is the meaning of this? Zephon realized the game was over. The Persistence Hunter had walked around his trap and dismantled it from the inside. In a final desperate move, he lunged for the manual trigger on his wrist. I will not be judged by animals, he shrieked. But Cyrith was faster. She didn't need a gravity pulse. She didn't need a weapon. She moved with the explosive power of a world with 5 times the gravity of the hub. She shattered her hard light restraints with a single violent flex of her muscles and lunged across the platform. She didn't kill him. She grabbed the Praetor's crystalline suit and slammed it into the obsidian floor, her claws pinning his arms before he could touch the trigger. The suit cracked, and a hiss of violet gas began to escape. It is over, Zephon, Cyrith whispered, her golden eyes inches from his. The hunt is finished. Station security flooded the platform, disarming the emitter and taking the leaking Praetor into custody. The delegates in the plaza watched in stunned silence as the beast they had feared saved their lives. They saw the silver scales covered in dust and blood. They saw the predator who had chosen to be a shield. And they saw the human. Elias Thorne walked over to Cyrith and offered her a steadying hand. He looked exhausted, his face pale and his injuries beginning to take their toll. But he was still standing. You did good, Cyrith, he murmured. We did good, Elias, she corrected, her hand closing around his. As they were led off the platform, not as prisoners, but as survivors, the crowd didn't move away this time. They stood still, watching them with an expression that wasn't fear. It was something new, something that looked a lot like the beginning of an apology. The hub was still cold. The air was still thin. But as Cyrith walked beside the man from Earth, she realized that the weight of the world was a little easier to carry when you weren't carrying it alone. They had a long way to go. There would be more trials, more politics, and more ghosts to face. But as the Persistence Hunter and the Apex Predator disappeared into the light of the terminal, they both knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was vast, but it wasn't empty anymore. Unstable tides, the medical suite in the Xandrosian embassy was a fortress of heavy shadows and the rhythmic, mechanical sigh of a high-pressure ventilator. It was one of the few places on the ocular hub where the gravity was keyed to 85% of Xandrosian standard, making every movement a deliberate act of power. Cyrith sat in the corner, her silver scales muted by the low light, watching the human sleep. Elias Thorne looked small in the center of the heavy-duty medical bunk. He was hooked up to a Terran-spec intravenous drip, a cocktail of synthetic platelets and nutrient-rich saline that was currently fighting to repair the damage to his internal organs. The sonic trauma from Zephon's subjugator had done more than just cause a nosebleed. It had rattled his skeleton, causing microfractures in his dense ribs and bruising the lining of his lungs. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a collection of broken parts held together by sheer, stubborn will. "I know you are awake, Elias," Sirith said, her voice a low vibration that seemed to pull at the heavy air. "Your heart rate has climbed by 5 beats per minute since I entered the room." Elias cracked one eye open. The dark iris was bloodshot, but the focus was sharp. "Can't hide anything from a predator, can I?" "You cannot hide from a Karnax who has spent the last 3 hours cataloging your breathing patterns," she replied. "Why did you not tell me the sonic weapon would hit you that hard? You stood there like a statue while your body was screaming." Elias shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at the bandages around his torso. "Because if I'd flinched, Zephon would have known he had us. Perception is 90% of the fight in this high-tier political circus. If the human looks invincible, the Aetherist starts to question his own math. If I drop, you're just a lone beast in a room full of panicked pencils." "Pencils?" Sirith's ears flicked forward. "The bureaucrats," Elias grunted, the slang slipping out naturally. "The guys who spend their lives pushing data and sharpening their angles, while someone else does the heavy lifting. They're fragile, Sirith. They rely on the script. I just rewrote the ending, is all." Sirith stood and moved toward the bunk. In the heavy gravity of the room, she was in her element, her every muscle rippling beneath her scales like liquid metal. She looked down at him, her golden eyes filled with a complicated mix of admiration and a strange, aching sorrow. "You nearly died for a political gesture." "I've nearly died for a lot less," Elias said, his voice dropping into a rasp. "Back on Earth, during the resource wars in the Andean Basin, I once spent 4 days tracking a high-value target through a mountain range with a punctured lung and half a canteen of water. I didn't do it because I was a hero. I did it because my team was counting on me to finish the op." "You talk as though you are a tool," she said, her claws clicking softly against the metal frame of the bed. "A weapon to be wielded and then discarded. That's what the Endurance 6 program was, Sirith. We weren't just soldiers. We were investments. They spent billions of credits to see how far they could push the human body before it snapped. Turns out it goes a lot further than anyone thought, as long as you're willing to live with the ghosts afterward." He looked away, staring at the ceiling. "The curatorate thinks we're a cooperative species because we're so good at acting the part. We're the friendly neighbors who bring over a gift of music and tea. But underneath that, we're the species that outlasted the megafauna. We're the ones who didn't stop until the entire planet belonged to us. We're scary, Sirith. That's why we play nice. We don't want the rest of the galaxy to see the wolf under the wool." Sirith reached out, and for the first time she touched him. She didn't use her claws. She used the soft, leathery pad of her palm, resting it gently against his forehead. He was burning with a fever, his body working overtime to heal. "My people are the same," she whispered. "We are loud and heavy and dangerous, so we isolate ourselves to keep the peace. We think that if we stay in our canyons, the world will forget we are monsters. But Zephon proved that the world only uses our silence to build better cages." The door to the medical suite hissed open, and a young Karnax aide stumbled in, his silver hair disheveled. "Ambassador, the Council, they have issued a new directive. They are not releasing the findings of the investigation to the public broadcast." Sirith's eyes narrowed into slits. "Explain." "They are calling it a private administrative matter," the aide said, his voice trembling. "They've taken Zephon into custody, but they are framing the whole thing as a localized malfunction of the hub's architectural grid. They aren't mentioning the gravity pulse. They aren't mentioning the assassination attempt. They want to sweep the whole thing under the rug to maintain the illusion of pure stability." Elias let out a sharp, cynical bark of laughter. "Of course they do. If they admit a praetor was running a mercenary hit squad, the whole curatorate structure starts to look like a house of cards. They'd rather blame the machines than admit their own rot. And what of the human? Sirith asked, her voice dangerously quiet. What of Elias Thorne's testimony? The aide looked at the floor. The council has ruled that Mr. Thorne's testimony is inadmissible. They claim his human biology makes him prone to auditory hallucinations under sonic stress. They are calling his recording of the confession unverified digital data. Sirith felt a cold, sharp fury crystallizing in her chest. She looked at Elias, who simply nodded as if he had expected nothing less. The pencils are protecting their lead, Elias said, pushing himself up into a sitting position despite the protests of his wounded ribs. They can't afford to let a predator be the hero. It breaks the narrative. I will not allow this, Sirith hissed, her tail lashing the air. I will go to the High Plaza myself. I will tear the truth out of them. And then what? Elias asked, reaching out to grab her wrist. His grip was weak, but the intent was absolute. You'll just prove them right. You'll be the violent Karnax who lost her temper. You'll be the beast they need to justify their fear. What would you have me do? Let them win? No, Elias said, his eyes gleaming with a dark, tactical intelligence. We changed the game. We're in lockdown, right? Well, let's see how the pure species handle a situation where the lockdown actually matters. Before Sirith could ask for clarification, the station's internal alarms began to wail. It wasn't the rhythmic chime of a diplomatic alert. It was the screaming, jagged siren of a level 5 biological breach. The monitors in the room flickered to life, showing a grainy feed of the hub's primary life support core. A black, oily substance was spreading across the ventilation filters, a biomechanical virus that was rapidly consuming the station's oxygen scrubbers. Zephon's failsafe, Elias whispered, his face going pale. The bastard! If he didn't win, he was going to burn the whole station down. That virus? Sirith watched the screen, her predator vision identifying the rapid molecular decay. It is Xandrosian in origin, a modified strain of a canyon mold. He's framing you again, Elias said, already pulling the intravenous needles from his arm. Even from a jail cell, he's setting the stage. By tomorrow morning, the ocular hub will be a graveyard, and the only species left breathing will be the ones who can handle the toxin, the Karnax. The Curatorate will see it as a final, desperate act of biological warfare by your people. We have to stop it, Sirith said, grabbing her cloak. The life support core is in the dead zones, Elias said, his voice steady even as he stumbled to his feet. Deck 42. No gravity, no light, and right now probably very little air. It's a 5-kilometer run through the service arteries. I can fly there in a shuttle, Sirith suggested. Negative. The lockdown has sealed the hangar bays. The only way in is through the manual maintenance crawls. And those are designed for drones, not silver-scale diplomats. Elias looked at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. He was the walking wounded, a man held together by bandages and drugs. But he was also a persistence hunter. You can't do this, Elias, she said. Your body will fail. My body has been failing since I was 22, Sirith, but my legs still move, and right now I'm the only one who knows the layout of those crawls. He offered her a lopsided, bloody smile. Besides, you're an apex predator. You need a tracker. Let's go earn our keep. They moved out of the embassy and into the chaotic corridors of the hub. The pure species were in a state of total collapse. Without the artificial calm of the station's recycled atmosphere, they were panicking, their thin bodies trembling as the first traces of the toxin began to cloud the air. They were prey in a forest fire, running blindly toward exits that were already sealed. Sirith and Elias ignored them, moving with a grim, focused purpose toward the descent shafts. They were the only ones heading toward the heart of the disaster. As they reached the entrance to the Deck 42 maintenance crawl, Sirith looked at the narrow, dark tunnel ahead. It was a journey of endurance, a test of will that would push them both to the absolute limit. And as they stepped into the darkness, Sirith realized that the lesson of the hub wasn't about how strong you were. It was about how much you were willing to suffer for those who couldn't suffer for themselves. The endurance factor. The dark was not merely the absence of light on Deck 42. It was a physical weight, a thick, suffocating blanket that tasted of ozone and the metallic tang of the Xandrosian mold. The gravity here was not just gone, it was broken. Every few hundred meters, the stabilizers would fire in a desperate, stuttering pulse, slamming them against the floor before releasing them back into the void. It was a rhythmic, bone-jarring cycle that threatened to rattle Sareth's dense skeleton into powder. She was an apex predator, built for the explosive lunge, the 10-second burst of power that could snap a rift beast's neck. But she was not built for this. Her muscles, designed for high-gravity, oxygen-rich environments, were beginning to starve. Each breath she took in the thinning, toxic air felt like swallowing shards of glass. Her scales were dulling, the silver turning to a bruised gray as her internal temperature began to drop. 5 kilometers, Elias had said. In a normal world, 5 kilometers was a morning stroll. Here, in the gut of a dying station, it was an odyssey through hell. How much further? Sareth gasped, her voice a dry rattle in the darkness. She was currently crawling through a horizontal conduit, her broad shoulders scraping against the reinforced plating. 2 kilometers to the primary scrubber, Elias replied. His voice was different now. It was no longer flat or professional. It was a rhythmic, mechanical rasp, timed perfectly with his movement. He was ahead of her, his smaller frame allowing him to navigate the tight spaces with a disturbing ease. His heart rate feedback was still buzzing in her ear, a steady, rapid thrum. 180 beats per minute. He had been at that level for nearly an hour. By any biological standard Sareth knew, his heart should have exploded. His body should have shut down from lactic acid poisoning, but he just kept moving. "Stay frosty, Ambassador," Elias said, the slang cutting through the gloom. "Don't think about the distance. Just think about the next 10 steps, then the 10 after that. We're just putting miles in the bank. You are." Bleeding again, Elias, she noted, her predator's senses picking up the copper scent of his blood in the stagnant air. "Just a leak," he grunted. "I'll patch it when we're done. Keep your eyes on my heels. If you lose the rhythm, you lose the race." The conduit opened into a vast, cylindrical chamber, the atmospheric exchange. It was a forest of massive, rotating fans and glowing coolant pipes, all covered in the thick, black carpet of the biomechanical mold. The air here was a dark fog, swirling in the zero gravity like ink in water. At the far end of the chamber, 300 meters away, was the primary control console. The virus had triggered the emergency flares, painting the room in a strobing, hellish red. Sareth looked at the distance, and for the first time in her life, she felt the cold finger of true despair. Her limbs felt like lead. Her vision was tunneling. I cannot, Elias," she whispered, her claws scraping uselessly against the deck plating. "My heart. It is too slow. I cannot find the power." Elias stopped. He turned around, his face a mask of sweat and grime, his eyes reflecting the red strobe of the emergency lights. He looked like a demon, a creature forged in the fires of a forgotten war. He didn't offer her words of comfort. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He moved back to her, grabbed the silver band on her arm, and leaned his forehead against hers. "Listen to me, Sareth," he hissed, the intensity of his voice vibrating through her skull. "You're a Carnax. You're built for the sprint. You're built to win the fight in the first 5 seconds. But this isn't a fight. This is a hunt. And on Earth, the hunter doesn't have to be faster than the prey. He just has to be the last one standing." He grabbed her hand, forcing her fingers to close around his forearm. "Feel that?" Sareth felt his pulse. It was a frantic, terrifying rhythm, the sound of a machine being pushed far beyond its red line. But it was consistent. It was a drumbeat that refused to falter. "That's 2 million years of stubbornness," Elias said. "That's the sound of a species that refused to die out when the world went cold. I'm not a tool, Sareth. I'm a human. And I am going to give you my rhythm. You don't have to be strong right now. You just have to be persistent." He began to move again, but this time he stayed beside her, his hand never leaving her arm. He began to count. 1, 2, 3, 4. He wasn't just counting steps. He was pacing her breathing, forcing her lungs to synchronize with his own. He was literally dragging her through the darkness using the sheer force of his will. Sareth felt a shift in her consciousness. The pain didn't go away, but it became a background noise, a distant hum. She focused on the count. She focused on the heat radiating from his hand. She realized that Elias Thorne wasn't durable because of his boosted mitochondria or his dense bones. He was durable because he had accepted that suffering was the price of survival, and he was willing to pay it indefinitely. They were halfway across the chamber when the gravity stabilizers gave one final, violent lurch. The floor beneath them buckled, and a massive coolant pipe tore free from its moorings, swinging toward them like a giant's club. Sirith's predator reflexes fired. The explosive burst she had been saving. She lunged forward, her claws extending, and caught the pipe mid-swing. The force of the impact sent a shock wave through her arms that she felt in her very marrow. But she held. She stood there, an apex predator in the red light, holding back a ton of reinforced steel while the humans scrambled beneath her. "Go!" she roared, the silver of her scales flashing with a dying brilliance. "Fix it!" Elias didn't hesitate. He reached the console, his fingers flying across the keys as the black mold began to hiss and bubble around him. He was breathing in pure toxin now, his lungs likely filling with the corrosive spores of the Zandrosian mold. 3 seconds. 2. 1. The chamber shuddered. A high-frequency pulse of violet light erupted from the console, the counter-agent. It swept through the room like a physical wave, vaporizing the black mold and neutralizing the toxin. The air began to clear, the cooling fans spinning back to life. But the gravity didn't stabilize. It stayed at 0. Sirith let go of the pipe, her strength finally spent. She drifted in the center of the chamber, her eyes closing, her heart rate dropping toward the dangerous depths of a Karnak's coma. She felt cold. So very cold. Then she felt a hand. Elias was there, floating beside her. He looked terrible. His skin was a grayish hue and his eyes were half closed, but he was still counting. 1, 2. We're not done yet, Ambassador, he wheezed. Still have to get to the manual. Airlock. He clipped his cable to her belt and began to pull. He was a small man, weighing less than a quarter of what she did, but he was swimming through the zero gravity with a relentless, rhythmic stroke. Sirith watched him, her mind drifting in the gray fog of exhaustion. She realized that she had spent her whole life fearing that she would break the world because she was too strong. And Elias had spent his life fearing the world would break him because he was too soft. They were both wrong. The strength of the predator was the ability to protect. The strength of the human was the ability to endure. Together, they weren't just survivors. They were a new definition of power. They reached the airlock of the primary deck, the doors hissing open to admit a flood of clean, pressurized air. Security droids and medical teams were already there, their lights blinding after the darkness of Deck 42. Elias collapsed onto the deck, his body finally shutting down as the mission parameters were met. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just lay there, his chest barely moving. Sirith crawled toward him, her silver scales scraped and bleeding, her pride a shattered thing. She reached out and pulled him into her arms, cradling his small, battered frame against her chest. "He is a hero," she roared at the approaching medical team, her voice shaking the bulkheads. "He is more than a tool. He is a human." As they loaded Elias onto a hovering stretcher, Sirith watched them go. She saw the faces of the Curatorate staff, the Vrelians, the Aetheris, the Gethans. For the first time, they weren't looking at her with fear. They were looking at her with a profound, stunned realization. They had seen the beast save their world, and they had seen the soft-skinned human lead the beast through the dark. The prejudice wasn't gone. The wall was still there. But as Sirith stood in the middle of the corridor, the clean air filling her lungs, she knew that the script had been rewritten. The pencils had lost their lead, and the wolves were no longer wearing wool. She looked down at her own hands, at the silver scales and the dark human blood. She understood now that she wasn't alone. She never had been. She had just been waiting for someone with enough endurance to find her in the dark. The cost had been high. Elias was in critical condition, and the political fallout of the bio-attack would ripple through the sector for cycles. But as Sirith followed the stretcher toward the medical bay, her head held high, she knew that they had crossed the finish line, and she was ready for the next race. Shadows of Xandros, The recovery ward was a cold cathedral of white light and the rhythmic hissing pulse of a Terran spec lung recycler. Elias Thorne lay beneath a transparent healing shroud, his skin a patchwork of synthetic grafts and bruised violet flesh. He looked like a statue carved from grief, motionless and silent. Sarah sat in the corner, her silver scales reflecting the clinical glow. She had refused to leave his side for 3 days, ignoring the frantic summons of the council and the hushed, terrified whispers of the medical staff who scurried past the doorway. To the curatorate, she was a monster in the house of healing. To herself, she was a sentinel guarding a fire that was slowly going out. "Ambassador," a voice rasped from the doorway. Sirith didn't turn. She knew the scent. Admiral Krell of the Zandrosian Fifth Fleet. He smelled of heavy minerals, burnt propellant, in the cold, unyielding iron of a world that never forgave weakness. He walked into the room, his heavy boots creating hairline fractures in the floor tiles. He was older than Sirith, his scales scarred and dull, his eyes 2 chips of frozen gold. "The High Command is displeased, Sirith," Krell said, his voice a subsonic rumble that made the medical monitors jitter. "You were sent here to be a diplomat, not a nursemaid for a softshell." "The softshell saved this station, Admiral," Sirith replied, her voice dangerously calm. "He led me through the dead zones when my own strength had failed. He breathed in the toxin meant for us so that the hub wouldn't become a graveyard." Krell let out a sound like grinding stones, a Karnak's laugh. "And for what? So the council could bury the truth? I have read the decrypted reports. They are calling us terrorists. They are using Zephin's failure as an excuse to lock our trade routes and seize our mining assets in the Terminus Belt. They don't want peace, Sirith. They want our teeth." Sirith finally looked at him. Her silver hair was loose, falling over her shoulders like a metallic waterfall. "Then let them try to take them. But we do not win by becoming the nightmare they already believe we are." Admiral Krell stepped closer, his shadow falling over Elias's bunk. "The Fifth Fleet is currently at the edge of the system. 12 heavy cruisers, 24 Raptor-class frigates. We are not here for a tea ceremony. We are here to escort you home, by force if necessary. The Council has 3 hours to lift the lockdown and issue a public apology, or we turn this glass bauble into stardust." "You would kill thousands of innocents," Sirith hissed, her claws extending with a sharp metallic click. "I would protect my own," Krell countered. "That is what a predator does. This human? He is an anomaly, a fluke of biology. You have spent too much time in the thin air, Ambassador. You have forgotten that in the deep canyons, only the heavy survive." He turned on his heel, his heavy cloak snapping behind him. 3 hours, Sirith. Make sure your belongings are packed. Or make sure you are ready to die with the rest of the prey." The door hissed shut, leaving Sirith in the silence of the lung recycler's breath. She looked at Elias, her heart heavy with a weight that gravity couldn't explain. She felt the old instincts screaming in her blood, the desire to hunt, to strike, to prove her dominance over the small-minded species of the hub. But then she remembered the rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. She remembered the warmth of a hand that didn't have claws, holding her steady in the dark. A hand moved. Elias's fingers twitched against the white sheet. His eyes didn't open, but his voice drifted out, faint and dry as desert wind. "Sounds like your boss is a real piece of work." "Elias?" Sirith leaned over him, her breath hitching. "You should not be talking. Your vocal cords are still repairing." "Never was much for staying quiet," Elias wheezed. He opened his eyes, the dark pupils blown wide from the pain blockers. "Is it true? The fleet is here?" 12 cruisers, Sirith said, her voice trembling. "They are going to attack." Elias managed a lopsided, bloody grin. "Well, that's a real cluster situation, isn't it? Talk about jumping from the frying pan into the intake manifold." The slang was strange, but she understood the sentiment. "They are going to destroy everything, Elias. Everything we fought for on Deck 42. They will prove the Curatorate right. They will show the galaxy that the Karnaks and the humans are just different breeds of the same violent plague." Elias coughed, a wet, rattling sound that sent a spike of red across the diagnostic monitor. "Then we We have to change the script again. You can barely breathe, Thorn. What can you do against a battle fleet? I can, I can walk, Elias said. He began to sit up, his movements agonized and slow. The medical shroud tore away, revealing the jagged scars and the fresh, angry welts of the healing grafts. He grabbed the edge of the bed, his knuckles turning white. Don't be a fool, Sirith cried, trying to push him back down. You will flatline before you reach the door. Then I'll be the fastest ghost on the hub, Elias grunted, his feet hitting the floor with a dull thud. He stood, his body swaying like a reed in a storm. He looked up at her, his gaze burning with that same relentless, terrifying persistence she had seen in the dark. Prejudice is a choice, Sirith. Krell is choosing to be a monster because it's easier than being a partner. The Council is choosing to be cowards because they're afraid of the weight. But we chose the cable. Remember? Sirith stared at him, her golden eyes wide. She saw the cost of his choices written in his blood. She saw the agony in every breath he took, and she realized that the humanistic lesson wasn't about being nice or being cooperative. It was about the endurance of the soul. It was about choosing to stay human when the universe was trying to turn you into a statistic. I remember, she whispered. Then get me my boots, Elias said, his voice growing stronger with every heartbeat, and tell the Council to open a channel. We're going to give them a performance they won't forget. They moved out of the medical bay, a silver-scaled giant and a broken, limping human. The station's security droids tried to stop them, but Sirith simply walked through them, her presence so overwhelming that the machine's logic processors struggled to find a reason to fire. They reached the high plaza, which was now a scene of utter chaos. Delegates were fleeing toward the escape pods. Their melodic voices turned to discordant shrieks. High Arbitrator Vora stood on the central platform, his thin hands shaking as he watched the tactical display. The Karnak's fleet was moving into firing positions, their weapons-grade lasers beginning to prime. Ambassador Sirith, Vora cried, his voice breaking. Call them off! We will negotiate! We will release the findings! It is too late for words, Arbitrator, Sirith said, her voice echoing through the plaza. You spent too long hiding behind your pencils. Now the ink is turning to blood. Wait! Elias shouted, stepping forward. He was leaning heavily on a service pylon, his face ashen. He tapped a command into his tablet, and the massive holographic emitters of the plaza flared to life. Instead of tactical maps or political symbols, the emitters showed the feed from Deck 42. It was raw, unedited footage from Elias's suit camera. It showed the darkness, it showed the black mold, and it showed the Karnak's ambassador, the silver-scaled beast, holding up a ton of steel to save a human. It showed the human, the soft shell, dragging the predator through the void. Look at it! Elias roared at the crowd, at the council, and at the ships waiting in the void. You see monsters? I see two people who refuse to stop. You see threats? I see the only two things on this station that actually give a damn about staying alive together. The images flickered, showing the moment the counter-agent was released, the moment the air became clear. It showed Sirith cradling Elias in the corridor, her roar of grief and protectiveness vibrating through the recording. Admiral Krell, Sirith shouted, looking up at the vaulted ceiling as if she could see the heavy cruisers through the hull. You say the deep canyons only value the heavy. Look at the man who stands beside me. He weighs 80 kilograms and he is held together by synthetic thread and stubbornness. Is he not heavy enough for you? Is his endurance not worthy of your respect? There was a long, agonizing silence. On the tactical display, the Karnak's fleet paused. The weapon primes flickered, but didn't fire. The silence was broken by the sound of a docking clamp engaging. It wasn't a military breach. It was a formal diplomatic connection. A single shuttle descended from the Fifth Fleet, landing in the center of the plaza. The doors opened, and Admiral Krell stepped out. He walked towards Sirith and Elias, his golden eyes scanning the human with a look of profound, confused curiosity. You are the one who lead her? Krell asked, his voice low. I'm the one who didn't stop, Elias replied, his legs finally giving out. He slid down the pylon, sitting on the obsidian floor, but he kept his head up. And I'm the one who will still be standing when your cruisers are out of fuel, Admiral. Because humans don't have an off switch. Krell looked at Sirith. You would choose this? You would choose a galaxy of thin air and soft shells over the honor of Xandros? I choose a galaxy where I don't have to be alone, Krell, Cirith said. I choose a world where strength is measured by what you carry, not what you crush. Krell looked back at Elias, then at the thousands of delegates watching from the shadows. He saw the fear, but he also saw the awe. He saw the beginning of a transformation. The prejudice hadn't vanished, but the foundation had been cracked. Admiral Krell offered a stiff, formal salute. Not to the ambassador, but to the human on the floor. The fleet will maintain a defensive perimeter, Krell said. We will not fire unless fired upon. But the council will issue the apology, and the human will receive Xandrosian medical honors. He turned to Vora. Arbitrator, start talking, before I change my mind. As the council began the frantic work of drafting the public statement, Cirith knelt beside Elias. She pulled him into her lap, her silver scales cool against his fevered skin. You did it, Elias, she whispered. You stopped a war. Just another day at the office, he wheezed, his eyes drifting shut. But remind me, next time, let's just stay in bed. Cirith laughed, a sound of genuine, silver joy. She looked out at the hub, at the stars, and at the strange, beautiful, and dangerous people who inhabited them. She knew the struggle wasn't over. There would be more shadows, more lies, and more tests of their endurance. But as she held the man from Earth, she knew that they had already won the most important hunt of all. They had found the truth in the middle of a lie, and they had found each other in the dark. The hunter's choice. The political fallout of the Spires incident was a slow-motion explosion that reshaped the power dynamics of the Ocular Hub over the next 48 hours. With the Karnak's Fifth Fleet hovering in the system, like a silent silver threat, and the raw footage of the biological breach playing on every public screen from the rim to the core, the Council of Three had no choice but to capitulate. Praetor Zephon was officially stripped of his title and sentenced to life in a high-gravity containment cell on Xandros, a poetic justice that Elias Thorne had suggested with a grim smirk. But for Cirith and Elias, the victory felt hollow. They were no longer the isolated beast in the ignored shadow. They were celebrities, symbols of a new integration that neither of them felt entirely comfortable with. The Xandrosian embassy was now a hive of activity filled with military advisors, medical specialists, and human diplomats who had arrived on the first shuttle from Earth. Among them was General Sarah Vance, the woman who had overseen the Endurance 6 program. She was a sharp-featured woman of 60, her hair a shock of white, and her uniform crisp enough to cut glass. She sat in Cirith's office, sipping a cup of synthetic tea while Elias sat nearby, his arm in a medical sling and his face finally regaining some color. You've caused a lot of paperwork, Elias, Vance said, her voice like gravel. The Curatorate is demanding to know why we didn't disclose the specifics of your augmentation. They're calling it a violation of transparency. Transparency is a luxury for species that don't get eaten, General, Elias replied. He glanced at Cirith, who was standing by the window, staring out at the hub's central core. We did what we had to do. The mission is secure. The mission, yes, Vance said. But what about you? The Endurance 6 program was never meant for long-term deployment. Your heart is under immense strain. Your cellular repair rates are dropping. You need to come home, Elias. You need to be decommissioned and moved to a low-stress environment. Cirith's ears swiveled back sharply. Decommissioned? It means retirement, Ambassador, Elias said, though his eyes didn't meet hers. It means I go back to Earth, sit on a beach, and wait for my parts to stop working. Cirith turned, her silver scales shimmering with an agitated light. He saved this station. He saved me. And now you wish to cast him aside like a broken tool? It's for his own safety, Vance countered, her tone level. His body wasn't designed for the life he's living. Every time he pushes himself like he did on Deck 42, he shaves months off his life. He is a hero, Ambassador. We want him to enjoy what's left of his time. Elias looked at Cirith, and for a moment the silence in the room was heavier than the gravity of Xandros. He saw the pain in her golden eyes, the raw, predatory fear of losing the only person who truly understood her. What do you want, Elias? Sirith asked, her voice a low, vibrating growl. Elias looked at the general, then at his own scarred hands. I spent 10 years being a weapon, General. I spent 10 years running so that other people could sleep soundly. I don't know how to sit on a beach. I don't know how to be a civilian. He stood up, his movement still stiff but certain. He walked over to Sirith and stood beside her, his head reaching just below her shoulder. I'm a persistence hunter, Elias said. And the thing about the hunt is that it doesn't end just because the sun goes down. I'm staying here. I'm staying as the head of security for the Karnax mission. Elias, you're committing suicide, Vance said, her eyes narrowing. No, ma'am, Elias said. I'm committing to a life. For the first time in 35 years, I'm choosing where I stand. General Vance stared at him for a long time. She saw the iron in his gaze, the same iron that had carried him through the Andean basin and the dead zones of the hub. She let out a long, tired sigh. Fine. It's your funeral, Thorne. But don't expect the government to pay for the medical bills. You're on your own now. We are not on our own, Sirith said, her hand coming down to rest on Elias's shoulder. He is under the protection of Clan Vora. Every credit, every medical drone, and every ounce of silver we possess is at his disposal. Vance nodded, stood up, and walked out of the room without another word. She was a woman of war, and she recognized a battlefield when she saw one. This was a battle for a future, and she had no place in it. When the door closed, Sirith looked down at Elias. You would stay, even if it kills you? I'm going to die anyway, Sirith, Elias said, a soft, genuine smile touching his lips. Everyone does. The trick is to make sure that while you're alive, you're doing something that matters. Being your shadow, it matters to me. He leaned his head against her arm, the silver scales smooth against his skin. I spent my whole life thinking I was a monster because of what they did to me. I thought I was just a machine that could run forever. But you looked at me and saw a person. You saw a partner. I'm not leaving that behind for a beach. Sirith felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sensation that made her feel lighter than the hub's low gravity ever could. She realized that the greatest prejudice she had faced wasn't from the curatorate or the Aetheris. It was her own belief that she had to be alone to be strong. She had judged herself as harshly as the world had judged her, and Elias had broken that judgment. The peace of the office was interrupted by a high-priority alert on Sirith's console. It was a message from the Rimward territories. Ambassador, it was a voice she recognized, one of the mercenaries Elias had spared on Deck 18. I'm sending this on an open channel. Zephon wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just a middleman. The guys who hired us, they're called the Synaptic Union, and they're not happy about the fleet. The Synaptic Union? Sirith's eyes narrowed. The biomechanical transhumanists? They want the Zandrosian mineral deposits for their neural link research, the mercenary said, and they don't care about pure accords or diplomatic immunity. They've already dispatched a cloaked strike team. They're heading for the hub's primary reactor. They're going to blow the whole station to get rid of the evidence. The screen went black. Elias checked his watch. It was 2100 hours. The station was quiet, the delegates finally settling into a fragile peace. Looks like the hunt isn't over yet, Elias said, his hand moving to the hidden holster on his hip. Sirith extended her claws, the silver tips gleaming in the office light. She looked at Elias, her partner, her tracker, her friend. Then let us show them how we handle threats, Elias Thorne. They moved out of the office and into the corridors of the hub, but this time, they didn't move as a predator and a shadow. They moved as a single unit, a perfect synthesis of power and endurance. As they reached the reactor core, they were met by a team of Synaptic Union assassins, creatures of chrome and silicon, their eyes glowing with a cold blue light. They moved with a jerky, unnatural speed, their limbs augmented by high-frequency servo motors. You cannot win, one of the assassins droned, its voice a synthesized monotone. You are biological, you are obsolete, we are the future. Sirith let out a roar that shook the very foundations of the reactor room. You are not the future, she cried. You are just another cage. She lunged, her silver body a blur of kinetic energy. She hit the first assassin with the force of a falling moon, her claws tearing through chrome and circuitry as if it were paper. She was the explosive power of Xandros, a force of nature that could not be contained. Beside her, Elias moved like a wraith. He didn't have her power, but he had a precision that was chilling. He used his EMP device to scramble their sensors, then moved in with his ceramic knife, cutting through the delicate fiber optic cables that connected their brains to their bodies. He was the persistence, the shadow that hit where they were weakest, the hunter who never missed. The battle was a whirlwind of silver and chrome, of red blood and blue sparks. It was a clash of philosophies, the machine against the soul, the calculated against the persistent. The lead assassin managed to pin Sirith against the reactor casing, its mechanical arm tightening around her throat. Obsolete, it repeated, its blue eyes flickering. Sirith struggled, her strength flagging as the machine's grip tightened. She looked over and saw Elias. He was surrounded by 3 assassins, his body battered and his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked like he was finished. But then, Elias did something the machine's logic couldn't predict. He didn't fight back. He dropped his knife. He dropped his EMP. He simply stood there and took the blows, his body absorbing the kinetic energy, his heart rate climbing to a terrifying 200 beats per minute. He moved toward the lead assassin, ignoring the mechanical blades cutting into his back. He reached the creature and grabbed its primary power coupling. What are you doing?" the machine droned. "You are dying. Your vitals are failing." "I'm just getting started," Elias wheezed. He didn't pull the coupling. He shorted it, using his own body as a bridge. The Endurance 6 augmentations in his nervous system acted like a lightning rod, funneling the reactor's ambient energy through his own skeleton and into the assassin's brain. It was a suicidal move. It was a move of pure, irrational sacrifice. The assassin screamed, a digital, distorted sound, and exploded in a shower of sparks. The mechanical arm around Sirith's throat went limp. Sirith caught Elias as he fell, the smell of ozone and burnt flesh filling her nostrils. She roared in fury and finished the remaining assassins, her claws rending them into scrap metal until nothing was left but silence and the hum of the reactor. She knelt on the floor, holding Elias's smoking, broken body. He wasn't breathing. His heart had finally stopped. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "No! You said you wouldn't stop. You promised." She began to perform CPR, her massive hands surprisingly gentle as she pumped his chest. She breathed for him, her silver scales pressed against his gray skin. She poured everything she was into him, her strength, her heat, her soul. 1, 2, 3, 4. She counted the rhythm. She refused to let him go. She was the predator, and death was the prey she was currently hunting. "Come back, Elias," she roared. "That is a command." A minute passed. 2, 3. Then a cough. Elias gasped, his eyes flying open. He convulsed in her arms, his heart kicking back to life with a violent, erratic thrum. He looked up at her, his eyes unfocused and swimming with pain. Did we win?" he whispered. Sirith pulled him close, her tears falling onto his scarred chest. "Yes, Elias. We won." The persistence hunter had outlasted the future. As the medical teams arrived to tend to the aftermath, Cyrus stood up, still holding Elias. She looked at the council members who had followed the droids. She looked at the human diplomats. She looked at the galaxy that was finally seeing them for what they were. The transformation was painful. It was bloody. It was incomplete. But as she walked out of the reactor room, she knew that they had crossed the most important threshold of all. They had chosen to be together, and in a universe of cold stars and empty voids, that was the only purity that mattered. The hunter's choice was made, and the hunt would go on. The calm within the storm. The silence that followed the destruction of the Synaptic Union assassins was not the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary, but the heavy, ringing void that follows a detonation. In the primary reactor core of the ocular hub, the air was thick with the acrid stench of ionized ozone, burnt silicon, and the metallic tang of human blood. Cyrith stood amidst the wreckage of chrome and carbon fiber, her breathing coming in jagged, desperate gulps. Her silver scales were scorched, and her ceremonial robes were nothing more than blackened rags. But her focus was entirely on the small, broken form cradled in her arms. Elias Thorne was a mess of charcoal and bruised flesh. The electrical discharge he had channeled through his own nervous system had left him smelling of singed hair and cauterized skin. His eyes were closed, his face a pale mask of exhaustion that seemed to age him by 20 years in a single heartbeat. To any other species in the hub, he would have looked like a discarded piece of junk. To Cyrith, he was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Medical droids swarmed the room, their blue emergency lights strobing against the obsidian walls. But Cyrith did not move. She sat on the deck plating, her massive body a silver shield against the chaos of the recovery efforts. "Get back," she growled, a subsonic vibration that made the nearest droid's sensors glitch and reset. "Ambassador, we must stabilize the human," a voice called out. Cyrith looked up. It was High Arbitrator Vora, accompanied by a retinue of Vrelian medics. The ancient bureaucrat looked shaken, his thin, parchment-like skin translucent with terror. He had seen the footage. He had seen the monsters save the station. And more importantly, he had seen the human sacrifice himself to stop a machine that should have been invincible. Vora walked closer, his spindly legs trembling. "The lockdown is over, Ambassador. The Synaptic Union strike team has been neutralized across all sectors. The Fifth Fleet is... They are assisting with the perimeter sweep. Your Admiral Krell has been quite thorough." Cyrith's golden eyes narrowed. "And the public broadcast? It is running on every screen in the hub," Vora whispered. "There is no hiding it now. The people, they saw everything. They saw the human. They saw you." Cyrith looked back down at Elias. She felt his heart, that stubborn, rhythmic drum, stuttering back to a steady pace. He was a persistence hunter, and it seemed he was even persisting against the call of the void. "Take him," she said, her voice dropping to a weary rasp. "But if he dies in your care, Arbitrator, there is no canyon on Xandros deep enough to hide you from my wrath." The Vrelian medics moved in with a hover stretcher, their movements frantic and precise. As they lifted Elias, a small piece of charred metal fell from his hand, the primary power coupling he had shorted with his own life. Cyrith reached out and closed her claws around it. It was cold and jagged, a relic of a fight that should have been impossible to win. The following 48 hours were a blur of political maneuvering and technical repairs. The ocular hub, once a monument to the pure species and their delicate sheltered existence, was now a station in mourning and transition. The pure narrative had been dismantled by the very beings it sought to exclude. In the bars and common rooms of the hub, the scuttlebutt was no longer about the beast in the embassy. It was about the soft shell who had walked through lightning. Admiral Krell met Cyrith in the diplomatic gardens 3 hours after the reactor fight. The gardens were a wreck, the exotic plants wilted by the atmospheric fluctuations, but the air was finally clean. "The brass back on Xandros are in a frenzy," Krell said, his voice a low thrum. "They don't know whether to give you a medal or court-martial you for starting a standoff with the entire curatorate. But the footage of the human, it's doing things to our people, Cyrith. The warriors, the veterans. They're calling him the heavy ghost. They've never seen a species with no scales and no claws fight with that kind of grit." "He's not a ghost yet, Admiral," Cyrith replied, watching a maintenance drone replant a shattered crystalline flower. "He's just a man who refuses to quit." Krell grunted, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. "I've ordered the fleet to stand down to a defensive posture. The Council has agreed to a full trade renegotiation. We get the terminus mining rights, and they get to keep their station. It's a fair trade for not being turned into a cloud of debris." "You did well, Admiral." "I did what was necessary," Krell countered. "But that human of yours, he's the one who changed the math. He made it personal for them. He showed them that the predator doesn't always have to kill to be respected." He walked away, his heavy footsteps sounding different this time. Not like a soldier on a warpath, but like a guardian on a patrol. Cyrith spent the rest of the evening walking through the hub. She did not hide her claws. She did not soften her gait. But for the first time, the delegates did not run. They did not dive into the shadows or whisper behind their hands. Some of them, the Vrelians, the Gethans, Even a few etherists simply stopped and inclined their heads, a silent acknowledgement of a shared survival. She found herself at the observation deck, looking out at the void. The hydrospires were being rebuilt, the glass already glowing with a faint, hopeful blue. She thought about the lesson Elias had tried to teach her. Prejudice was a cage, but it was a cage that required two people to build. The one who feared and the one who accepted that fear as truth. I was my own jailer, she realized, her golden eyes reflecting the light of 1,000 distant stars. I thought my strength was a wall, but it was just a screen I hid behind because I didn't think anyone was durable enough to see what was behind it. She pulled the charred power coupling from her belt and looked at it. It was a reminder of the cost of that lesson. Elias had nearly bought the farm because she hadn't been fast enough and because the world hadn't been kind enough. But they were both still here. The transformation had begun. It was in the way the Gethans now stood a little closer to her in the hallways. It was in the way the arbitrator now spoke to her as an equal rather than a liability. It was in the way she no longer felt like a ghost in a porcelain world. She was Cyrith of Clan Vora, and she was no longer alone in the dark. Resonance of the soul. 6 months had passed since the Synaptic Union strike team had tried to turn the ocular hub into a memorial for the obsolete. The station had changed. The sterile white-on-white aesthetic of the pure species had been tempered by the introduction of Zandrosian stonework and Terran greenery. The gravity was no longer a constant, frustrating low. It was now variable by sector, allowing the heavy species to walk with pride while the light species drifted in their own assigned clouds. It was a messy, complicated, and often frustrating integration, but it was working. The pure accords had been replaced by the Resonance Treaty, a document that valued adaptability over ancestry. Cyrith stood on the balcony of the new Joint Security Headquarters, her silver scales polished and gleaming. She was no longer just an ambassador, she was the high overseer of the hub's integrated guard. Beside her, Elias Thorne leaned against the railing. He was still scarred. The electrical burns had left a permanent, jagged pattern of silvered skin across his neck and arms, and he walked with a slight, rhythmic limp that he refused to let a medical droid fix. He was no longer wearing a soldier's uniform or a diplomat suit. He wore a simple, durable vest of Zandrosian weave, the dark fabric a contrast to his pale skin. "You're thinking again," Cyrith said, her voice a warm rumble that no longer carried the subsonic edge of a threat. "It's a dangerous habit for a human." "I'm just looking at the view," Elias replied, gesturing toward the central core, where ships from 6 different systems were docked in a peaceful, chaotic cluster. "It's a real goat rope down there, but at least nobody's shooting." "You miss the shooting?" "I miss the simplicity of it," Elias said, offering her a lopsided grin. "Diplomacy is a whole different kind of endurance. I've had 3 meetings this morning with the Vrelian Trade Guild about the taxes on atmospheric scrubbers. I'd rather face another strike team, honestly." Cyrith chuckled, the sound a silver chime in the afternoon air. "You chose this, Elias. You chose to be a partner instead of a weapon." "I did, didn't I?" He looked at her, his dark eyes filled with a quiet, hard-won peace. "Best choice I ever made." They spent a moment in comfortable silence watching the rhythm of the station. The prejudice hadn't vanished, not entirely. There were still those who whispered in the corners, still those who feared the weight of the Karnax and the persistence of the humans. But those voices were growing quieter, drowned out by the sound of cooperation. Cyrith looked down at her hands. Her claws were retracted, her palms resting gently on the railing. She remembered the day Elias had arrived, the small, soft-shell man she had thought was a joke. She thought about how much she had changed since then. She was still strong, still the apex predator of her clan, but her strength was no longer a weapon of isolation. It was a foundation. She turned to Elias, her expression serious. "I have been thinking about the hunt of the sun, Elias, the rite of passage on Zandros. The one where you track something until you are the only one left?" "Yes. I realized that for my whole life, I thought I had passed that rite because I was the only one who didn't collapse. But I was wrong. The true rite isn't about being the only one left. It's about finding the person who makes you want to keep running, even when you don't have to." Elias reached out and took her hand. His skin was warm, his grip steady. He didn't have her power, but he had a way of grounding her that even the highest gravity of Xandros couldn't match. Well, I'm not going anywhere, Cyrith. I'm a persistence hunter, remember? Once I catch something I like, I'm in it for the long haul. Cyrith smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the hub's artificial sun. She felt a profound sense of earned wisdom, a clarity that had been forged in the dark and tempered by fire. I spent 35 years of my life believing that the galaxy was a series of walls. There were the walls of my home canyons on Xandros, the walls of my own scales, and the walls of the fear that everyone else built around me. I thought that to be strong was to be the one who could survive the most silence. I was the heavy ghost, a predator in a world of prey, and I accepted that my fate was to be respected but never known. I saw the world in explosive bursts of power, a lunge, a kill, a victory. I never understood the value of the long, slow crawl through the dark. But then I met a man who had no walls. Elias Thorne was a creature of soft skin and broken bones, but he carried a strength that was geological in its patience. He showed me that the most dangerous thing in the universe isn't a predator with claws, but a person who refuses to stop caring even when the world is trying to crush them. He taught me that endurance isn't just about surviving the cold, it's about staying warm enough to light the way for someone else. I used to be afraid that if I let someone in, I would break them. Now I know that the right person won't break. They'll just adjust their rhythm to match yours. We are the architects of our own isolation, and the only way out of the cage is to realize that the door was never locked. We were just too busy sharpening our claws to try the handle. I spent my life sharpening my claws because I thought the world was a whetstone, only to find that the hardest thing to cut through was my own fear of being seen. I used to think my strength was the only truth I had, and I used it to keep everyone at a distance so they wouldn't see the parts of me that were lonely. I wonder, what part of yourself have you been hiding under armor, terrified that if people saw the soft parts, they would find a way to break you? Is there a wall you have built around your heart that is actually keeping you a prisoner instead of keeping you safe? Cyrith watched as the stars outside the hub began to shift, the station rotating slowly to face the dawn of a new solar cycle. She didn't look back at the shadows of the reactor or the echoes of the purge. Instead, she tightened her grip on the human's hand, her silver scales catching the first rays of the morning light. Together, they turned away from the void and walked back into the living, breathing heart of the station they had saved.